Hello everyone, welcome to Local Learnings. This video is about the chapter 3 Liberalisation, Privatisation and Globalisation and Appraisal of the Indian Economic Development of Class 12. So, in this chapter, it is telling about the new economic policy that was adopted in the year 1991. India met with an economic crisis in the year 1991 relating to its external debt. Subsequently, the government introduced a new set of policy measures which changed the direction of our developmental strategies. So that was a new economic policy, or the LPG, or Liberalisation, Privatisation and Globalisation. So just now we saw that India was met with an economic crisis. So what was that economic crisis? What was the situation or condition of India in the year 1991? So there was a slow growth in the national income of the country, then inflation rate increased. So what is inflation? In simple words, we can say that inflation is the rise in price, and it results in the fall in the value of money and fall in the purchasing power of money. Then there was a balance of payment crisis. So what is balance of payment? Balance of payment means it is a systematic record of all the economic transactions over a period of time with the rest of the world. So the economic transactions of India with other countries is termed as balance of payment. So India had less foreign exchange reserves because the exports were less and imports were more, and the foreign exchange reserves were only sufficient for 2 or 3 weeks of imports. Then the expenditure of India was greater than its revenue or income. That means there was a fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit means the expenditure is greater than the revenue or income. And the deficit financing was around 3%. Then the prices of oil was very high. That means the prices of petroleum products were very high, and the prices of necessary products, that means the basic necessities, were also very high. So the origin of this financial crisis can be traced from the year 1980s, and we know that when implementing various policies and its general administration, the government generates funds from various sources, such as through taxation and running of the public sector and so on. So when the expenditure is more than the income, the government borrows for finance of this deficit from banks, and also from the people within the country, and from international financial institutions and so on. Then the World Bank is also known as IBRD, or International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and IMF is also known as International Monetary Fund. The full form of IMF is International Monetary Fund. So as a result of this economic crisis or the financial crisis, India applied for loan from WB, the World Bank, and the IMF. So they laid certain conditions, and they expected India to fulfill those conditions to get the loan. So those conditions are listed here. The first one is liberalize and open up the economy by removing the restrictions on private sector. So by removing the restrictions on private sector, we have to liberalize the economy and open up the economy. Then reduce the role of public sector in many areas. So that means give importance to private sector and open up many areas that is under the public sector to the private sector. So allow them to work in certain areas that is under the public sector. Then remove trade barriers between countries, between the India and the other countries. So these are the conditions that were put forward by the World Bank and IMF. That means liberalize the economy, privatize the economy, and globalize the economy. So that is what LPG is: liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So India agreed to these conditionalities of the World Bank and IMF and announced the new economic policy, that is LPG. The next topic is economic reforms of 1991 new economic policy, that is NEP. So what is economic reform, or what are economic reforms? So economic reform is a long-term multi-dimensional collection of various policies for the economic development, or for the development of the economy. So it is a long-term collection or group of various policies and activities for the development of the economy. Its target is the economic development. So these policies aimed towards creating a more competitive environment in the economy and removing the barriers of entry and the growth of firms. That means to liberalize the economy and to open up the economy so that the competitiveness, or it will create a competitive environment, and which will lead to the development of the private sector as well as public sector, and the different sectors of the economy, that is primary, secondary and tertiary sectors of the economy. And we must remove the barriers on entry and exit of firms. That means the trade barriers must be removed. Then what all are the objectives of NEP, or that is new economic policy? So to reduce the role of public sector in many areas, that means to give importance to private sector, to open up many areas under the public sector to the private sector to operate. Then to open up the economy and to remove restrictions on private sector, that means to liberalize the economy and globalize the economy. Then reduction of fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit means a situation where the expenditure is greater than the revenue. Then to create more competitive environment by opening up the economy, the competitiveness or the competition between different companies and different areas increases. So this enhances and develops the economy. Then to eliminate trade barriers and increase inflow of foreign capital. So when the trade restrictions are removed, or trade barriers are removed or eliminated, this will lead to the increase in the economic transactions of the country with other countries or with other rest of the world. As a result, this will solve the problem of balance of payment crisis. Then now we are going to look at the classifications of NEP, or New Economic Policy. So there are mainly two classifications: stabilization measures and structural reform measures. And the first one, that is stabilization measure. So what is the stabilization measure, and what all are the stabilization measures? So stabilization measures are short-term measures intended to correct some of the weaknesses or shortcomings that have been developed in the balance of payment, and to bring inflation under control or to control prices. So that is what stabilization measure means. It is a short-term measure, and it points towards the correcting the weaknesses of or the shortcomings in the development of the balance of payment, and to bring the inflation under control. Then the next one, the second one is structural reform measures. So the structural reform measures are long-term measures, whereas the stabilization measures are the short-term measures. So the structural reform measures improves the efficiency of the economy and increases the international competitiveness of the economy, and it also eliminates rigidity in various segments of the economy. That means it simplifies various segments of the economy, the procedures of various segments of the economy. So now we are going to look at the LPG in detail. So the first one is liberalization. So what is liberalization? Liberalization means removing all unnecessary controls and restrictions like permits, licenses, quotas, etc. imposed by the government. So the first reform under liberalization is deregulation of industrial sector. That means the industrial reforms. So the regulatory mechanisms were there in these industrial sectors, such as industrial licensing. Then many areas were not allowed or open up to the private sector, and it was only taken by the public sector. And there were many reservations for the small scale industries, and the controls on the price fixation and so on. So through liberalization in industries, the industrial licensing were abolished, not for all the industries but for many of the industries, and the economy was opened up to the private sector. So most of the areas under the public sector was given for operation to the private sector too, and many goods produced by SSIs, that is small scale industries, were de-reserved. That means were also given for other sectors or other people for operation, and the allowed market to determine prices. So the market decided the prices rather than the government for many of the goods and services. So a few industries required license for its operations. So for certain industries, license was required. So such industries were the industries dealing with alcohol, cigarettes, hazardous chemicals, industrial explosives, electronics, aerospace and drugs, and pharmaceuticals. And now the only industries that are reserved for the public sector and where the private sector cannot operate are defense equipments, atomic energy generation and railway transport, and all the other functions or all the other areas are open up for the private sector to operate. And also the market has been allowed to determine the prices of the commodities. So the next reform under liberalization is the financial sector reforms. So the financial sector is regulated by the Reserve Bank of India or RBI. So RBI had too much control through high bank rate, high cash reserve ratio and statutory liquidity ratio. So what is cash reserve ratio? Cash reserve ratio means some amount should be kept as a reserve by each commercial bank and RBI according to the rules and regulations of the RBI. And what is statutory liquidity ratio? So statutory liquidity ratio or SLR is the amount that is asked by the RBI to the commercial banks to keep as reserve in the form of cash in the hands of commercial banks itself. So one of the major aims of financial sector reforms is to reduce the role of RBI from a regulator to facilitator of financial sector. So the main aim is to reduce the role of RBI to from regulator to facilitator. So from the person who regulates the other banks to a person who facilitates or provides the facilities rather than regulating or controlling. So this led to the establishment of private sector banks. And the foreign investment in banks was also raised to around 50%, and foreign institutional investors or FII are now allowed to invest in Indian financial markets. So reducing the role of RBI means it means that the financial sector may be allowed to take decisions on many matters without consulting the RBI. And also those banks who have fulfilled these conditions have been given certain freedom to set up new branches without the approval of RBI and rationalize their existing branch networks. Then the next reform is in the tax reforms. So the next one is tax reforms. So what is a fiscal policy? Fiscal policies are the government policies on expenditure and revenue of public, and it reduced the taxes on individual income. So as part of this tax reform, this reduced the taxes on individual incomes, which reduced certain problems, because when the tax is high, people will be reluctant to pay off this tax and they will find it hard to pay off this tax. So when it is reduced, it encouraged the people to pay off this tax. Then corporation tax was also reduced. So corporation tax or companies tax is the tax on the company's profits, and the taxes were imposed on goods to facilitate the establishment of a common national market, and many tax procedures were also simplified. The tax procedures were also simplified. Then the fourth reform is foreign exchange reforms. So it was the first important reform in the external sector, and the rupee was devalued against foreign currencies to solve balance of payment crisis. So through devalue of rupee against foreign currencies, this freed the rupee value in the foreign exchange market from government control and increased the inflow of foreign exchange. So devaluing of rupees made our goods cheaper in the foreign market and increased the inflow of foreign exchange. So as a result, the exports increased because the demand for Indian products increased. Then the next reform is the fifth one, trade and investment policy reforms or the trade policy reforms. So the first point is liberalization of trade was started to increase international competitiveness of industrial production, foreign investment and technology into the economy. So that means the trade barriers were removed or eliminated, so the international competitiveness was increased, and amongst the industrial production and foreign investment and technology into the economy. So foreign investment and technologies, latest technologies also came to the economy through liberalization in trade, and to enhance the efficiency of local industries. So this enhanced the efficiency of local industries because they were available with these kinds of latest technologies and enable the adoption of modern technology. The target was at dismantling of quotas, then reduction of tariff rates and abolition of licensing of imports. So such that means the trade barriers were removed. Then export duties have also been removed. So we have finished liberalization and now it is privatization. So what is privatization? So privatization means giving importance to private sector, transfer of ownership or management of government owned organizations to private sector. Or in other words, we can say that selling of ownership of the government owned organizations to private parties. So there are two ways by which we can privatize the economy. The first one is withdrawal of the government ownership and management of public companies, and the second one is sale of public sector companies to the private owners or private individuals or private sector. So the sale of a part of the equity of PSCs, that is public sector enterprises, to the public or to the private individuals. To the public means to the people or the residents, or to the private individuals is known as disinvestment. The selling of public enterprises to the private parties is called disinvestment, and it improves financial discipline and facilitates modernization. So, as the motive of this public sector is social motive or social welfare, so when it comes to when these organizations or enterprises comes to the private sector, they will be able to perform well and enhance their activities and their functions. So that's why it improves the performance of PSAs or public sector enterprises, and also it ensures the optimal utilization of resources. So, as part of privatization, to encourage privatization, several propositions were announced, such as Maharatna, Navaratna, and Miniratna. So, these were introduced in order to improve the efficiency, infuse professionalism, and enable them to compete more effectively and efficiently in the liberalized economy. So the companies who are granted with Maharatna is the Indian Oil Corporation Limited and the Steel Authority of India Limited. Then the companies with Navaratna are Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, Mahanagar Telephone Nigam Limited, and with Miniratna are Bharat Sanchar Nigam Limited, Airport Authority of India, and Indian Railway Catering and Tourism Corporation Limited. And 62 other profit-making enterprises are called mini-ratnas. Then the final one, that is globalization. So globalization is the integration of the economy of the country with the world economy. It is turning world into one whole or borderless economy. So it converts the world into a single economy without boundaries. So in simple words, we can say opening up of economy. So under globalization, there are mainly two reforms. The first one is outsourcing. So outsourcing means hiring of employment by a company from external sources. That means from other countries. The employment, hiring employment from other countries, or hiring the labor force of other countries is called outsourcing. It becomes easier these days with the growth of the fast modes of communication, especially IT, that is information technology, and transport. So many of the services such as voice-based business processes, then record keeping, accountancy, banking services, music recording, film recording, then book transcription, clinical advice, or even teaching are being outsourced by companies in developed countries to India as well as to many other countries. That means the developed countries hire employment from other developing countries like India, which will give them access to skilled laborers and skilled work from other countries, especially like India. This allows many companies to get skilled labor from other countries at low wage rates. Then coming to the next topic, that is WTO. WTO stands for World Trade Organization, which was founded in the year 1995, and before it was known as GATT, or General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, which was established in 1948, and its purpose or its intention is to enlarge production and trade and ensures optimal utilization of resources and protection of the environment. It facilitates international trade, that means imports and exports, and removes tariff and non-tariff barriers, which will enhance the competitiveness as well as the international trade and provide greater market to all member countries. So this will enhance the member countries and will give them a greater opportunity and chance to expand their market and expand their working or activities to different areas. So this chapter is finished, and I hope this video is helpful for you and is clear for you. Please mention your doubts or queries in the comment section, and we will see with the NCRT solutions in the next part as the next part. So I hope it is clear. So please to subscribe my channel and press the bell icon to get notified whenever I upload a video. So thanks for watching. Have a nice day.